Well, good afternoon and welcome everyone to the second FOSI Briefs the States, Striking the Right Balance in Online Safety. Thank you to those of you who joined in person, and welcome to those of you who are joining us virtually. If you have questions throughout this programming, please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A, and we'll be sure to get to them during the Q&A portion of our programming. My name is Marissa Edmond. I'm the policy coordinator at the Family Online Safety Institute. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with FOSI, we are a nonpartisan 501c3 organization who works to make the online world safer for children and their families. We work in what we like to call the 3 Ps of online safety: enlightened public policy, good digital parenting, and robust industry best practice. Today, we're here to highlight the extensive work going on at the state level here in Utah and then across the country. Over the last year, states across the country have been racing to address the issues of kids' online safety. Parents, educators, and young people themselves have come forward to discuss the benefits and drawbacks of our current online climate. Our first event of this kind was held just this past May in Annapolis, Maryland, to discuss the proposed legislation of the Maryland's Kids Code, a bill modeled after the UK's Age-Appropriate Design Code, which California later adopted and made their own. On this panel, we had Delegate Jared Solomon, the lead sponsor of the Maryland Kids Code, Mary Alvord, a psychologist who put out a report on a health advisory on social media in adolescence, and 2 policy analysts who are experts in tech policy, privacy, and digital safety. Our role at FOSI is to convene thought leaders, industry members, and policymakers to bring balanced and nuanced perspectives to the issue of kids' online safety. In the pursuit to keep children safe online, we want to make sure that we are ensuring their rights and privacy as well. Utah made a splash, being the first state to pass legislation related to kids' social media regulation. The law now does a few things. It requires parental permission for children under 18 to create a social media account, mandates age verification for all users, restricts the hours teens can use social media, and makes social media companies liable for young users becoming addicted to their platforms or experiencing other online harms. Utah's Social Media Regulation Act was signed into law this past March, but doesn't go in effect until March of 2024. And there's still some underdefined aspects of the law that need to be figured out before it can be enforced, such as the process of age assurance, a complicated and really important part of the law. Lead sponsor of the bill, Senator Michael McKell, recently acknowledged that there is both opportunity and motivation to make amendments in the upcoming legislative session before this law goes into effect. An important part of why we're here today is to lend our perspective, experience, and recent work to these policymakers who will be making really important decisions in the next few months. We thank them for their interest in protecting young people online and hope to work with them to find the right and often difficult balance of effective online policy and legislation. Today, you'll hear from 3 local leaders to discuss how these new laws impact children and families and how we can make progress towards ensuring a safer world online while also allowing children the freedom to explore age-appropriate materials. I'm happy now to turn it over to my colleague, Andrew Zach, the policy manager at the Family Online Safety Institute, who will be moderating this discussion, and joined by Ann Collier, Taylor Barkley, and Melanie Durfee. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marissa, and thank you everyone for attending here in person today and to our online audience. Marissa mentioned who we are. We'll just go briefly down and I'd like to start with who you all are, what your day job is, and why you're interested in online safety. Maybe start with Ann first.
Age before beauty, I think. I have been just following the whole public discourse about youth and digital media since 1997. Absolutely fascinating to see how the public discourse around youth safety has evolved over time, how people's concerns have developed, how little legislation has happened, and what's been happening literally around the world. So I run a nonprofit called the Net Safety Collaborative. It's almost 10 years old now. Before that, I ran Net Family News, which is where I blog, netfamilynews.org. I've been blogging there since before there were blogs. And 1997, when I started writing about this, is when the Supreme Court struck down the Communications Decency Act, all but Section 230, which is what platforms rely on a lot in order to really function in the digital age. I've served on 3 national task forces. The last one was under the Obama administration, and I co-chaired that one at the Commerce Department. I have advised numerous platforms on youth safety and still do. Meta's, all 3 of their platforms, YouTube and Roblox. And I also advise 2 Europe-based companies, Teleperformance and Yubo, which is a live video chat app. I serve on the board of the National Association for Media Literacy Education and the Young and Resilient Research Center in Sydney, Australia. So I just have exposure to so many different perspectives on this subject, and I think probably it's the research that is most important to me to follow. So, Taylor. Oh.
Hello, everyone. My name is Taylor Barkley. I'm the Director of Technology and Innovation at the Center for Growth and Opportunity, just up the road at Utah State University, although I live and work mostly in the Washington, D.C. area. And the Center for Growth and Opportunity, or the CGO as we call it for short, is an economic policy research center. We focus on topics technology innovation, energy and immigration, asking and trying to find answers to the big questions that keep Americans from living a more abundant and prosperous future. And this issue is important to me for a number of reasons. I'm a father of two young boys. First and foremost, my area, and the second reason, my area of research over the last half a dozen years or so has been at kind of the intersection of culture, society, and technology. And this issue of children and youth staying safe online, the impact of social media on teens in particular has been one of the, I'd say, hottest debates and discussions kind of in that broader section of issues. So in January, I published a paper on what policymakers can do to keep minors safe online. In my role at the CGO, I work on commissioning research from scholars around the nation. And a couple months ago, we published a paper from 2 researchers at the University of North Carolina outlining specific age assurance policy recommendations. My colleagues and I have developed toolkits for parents, for caregivers, for policymakers on the issues of keeping teens safe online. Looking at the research, the why we're here, I think is an important question. Maybe we can get at the mental health impacts, positive and negative. We've released some primers on those as well. So I'm excited for this discussion. Thanks for letting me join the panel.
Thank you. I'm Melanie Durfee. I work for the Utah State Board of Education. I work on the Digital Teaching and Learning Grant team. I manage the Digital Teaching and Learning Grant, which funds technology for all 41 of the Utah districts, as well as about 2/3, 60 of the charters. So I spend a lot of time helping the schools and charter, the technology leaders come up with technology plans, pivot those technology plans, because a 5-year technology plan is going to see a lot of changes in technology. And so I do a lot to work with them. I spend a lot of time listening to what their needs are and trying to help provide resources. As most of you probably already know, Utah education is a local control state. So I, the State Board of Education, try to provide leadership, but the really significant decisions happen at a local level. And so my job is to try to give them the best information that we possibly can give them.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here today. As I think Taylor said, we can dive right in. So, I mean, in talking about the need for online safety policy, and I think it's important to acknowledge that the teenage mental health crisis that a lot of people in this country are going through, it is real. Technology can play a role in it, and it's a priority for us to address. And so I think this is highlighted by a couple recent research and advisories and guidance from the APA, the American Psychological Association, as well as the US Surgeon General. And both of those came out earlier this year. I've got copies of them, happy to dive into them more, but they were both nuanced, balanced perspectives that talked about, echoed actually how FOSI talks about online safety in terms of balancing risks and harms and mitigating harms while still having some positive aspects and benefits to digital lives. So I was curious what you made from some of this recent research or medical field advisories, and maybe how this is played out in your lives or your jobs.
You want me to start? Okay. Well, my most recent project was, we just put it to bed, was a book about youth and social media and mental health for the American Psychiatric Association. And they are now working on publishing it early next year. But what I was really glad to see after all the work that we put into it, editing the work of more than 36 scholars in multiple countries, is how in line it was, how aligned it was with what both the APA wrote in its guidance last May and the US Surgeon General. And, you know, some of the key findings were that using social media is not inherently beneficial or harmful to young people, and its effects have as much to do with how they use tech and media as the features in the apps and platforms themselves. And they also, both reports pointed out how fluid and individual tech use is among young people and how fluid adolescence is as well. That, you know, as they mature, you need to sort of calibrate policy, which makes it extremely difficult. My heart goes out to lawmakers, right? To like strike that balance, because it's extremely difficult. And we can't assume, and many scholars have said, that there's just too much of a bias toward risk in both policymaking and even the scholarship, and that we, you know, the jury is still out on ultimate effects.
Yeah, building on that, the jury is definitely still out. And I think, you know, new research is coming out weekly, sometimes multiple times a week, you know, even being in this a full-time position focused on this. And I cover a range of tech policy issues, so I'm not even full-time on this particular issue. It can be difficult to keep up. So for parents, for caregivers out there, for teachers, for lawmakers, it can be quite overwhelming. You know, and if I had to synthesize it, you know, quickly for someone, I would say the most popular voices who, you know, just, you know, say like Jonathan Haidt, Jean Twenge, who have, I think, even the media mischaracterization of their findings of saying it is conclusive, there is a causal link between, you know, we need to define the problem here. I think the problem we're discussing is the use of social media and negative health impacts on teens. Their characterization is much, and the media characterization of their characterization is much simpler than I think the majority of child psychologists and researchers. And, you know, there was a notable survey that really caught my attention that came out 2 weeks ago from Andrew Shabilsky at Oxford, a decade looking at data of 72 countries, nearly 1 million people over a decade, on, you know, comparing use of social media, particularly to meta products, Facebook and Messenger, and overlaying that with Gallup's, I think, well-being survey that they've done for decades, and comparing the data and to your point, and basically came back null. And that's just another very rigorous study to kind of put on the pile, and it changes daily. And I think also what makes this particularly difficult, my last thing, you know, before passing it on here, this topic is rife with personal anecdotes. I think of the lawsuits that these school districts are joining, the story after story of individual teenagers who, the parents, their caregivers, have said, oh, they were using such and such social media product and then ended up in self-harm or eating disorder or even taking their own life. And that's just something that is we need to take seriously. And I think that's like another background to the academic research, but not to ignore the personal anecdotes and to really get people and kids and teens the resources they need.
Ditto. Yeah, this is a really complicated situation. Right now, Utah State Board of Education tries to provide leadership for LEAs. I'm saying the same thing over and over again, it seems. We tried to provide information and opportunities for collaboration, but this really does need to be a local decision. And
Great. Well, thank you. I mean, to bring out something as well from the Surgeon General's advisory, in it, they laid out steps that parents, industry, and policymakers can take, both to give them responsibility and also action items. And that's something that mirrored what FOSI talks about as our culture of responsibility for online safety. That involves parents, children and young users themselves, teachers, law enforcement, tech companies, and government all have a role to play. And so I think we were really glad to see that level of giving agency to all of these actors and hoping that we can come together to work on this important issue. To get a little specific, why are we holding this event in Utah? Well, as Marissa mentioned, they passed the Social Media Regulation Act, the first of its kind in the country. And so we hope to dig in a little bit on that, maybe starting with some things that we appreciate or some positives from it before getting into a little bit of the constructive criticism, as well as opportunities to improve in the next couple months. So I guess we can dive into this new law.
Yeah, I appreciate Utah legislators and Governor Cox using their platform to, I think, raise this issue and the tools out there for parents and caregivers. This recent public relations campaign, I think, has a lot of effective solutions in it. And, like you were saying, Andrew, I'm in agreement. This is a the problem to mitigate, negative mental health effects for teens who use social media. That is 1,000 different solutions. It's not a silver bullet. And I think involving public policy is very, very complex. So, one other thing, to mention with this law's passage, I think, passing the age assurance and age verification rulemaking to the Consumer Protection Division was perhaps a helpful thing. So it wasn't written into the legislation on the front end, and there will be a chance for public comment and even more discussion, because that's really the linchpin of the whole bill. So I would say that was a positive thing.
We have two mics.
We do.
I think it's important to have some form of age assurance going forward. I don't think we're there yet quite with the technology. I think there is one company I'm aware of that has been sanctioned by the British government called Yoti. Yoti actually builds data minimization into their technology. So, and Taylor can say a whole lot more about this, but I think it's really important to have privacy built into age assurance as much as possible. And I think the intentions of these laws are really good, but in many cases, there's too much of a correlation with our youth mental health crisis and digital media. They don't track exactly, right? And even the Surgeon General said that, yes, we absolutely need to address the mental health crisis. children are in crisis. In fact, we have a mental health crisis among all of us right now, and there are many, many factors that are, affecting that. But even suicide prevention experts will say there is never one single thing that is causative in any kind of crisis, whether it's suicidal crisis or mental health crisis. And I think what I really struggle with in this law is that it assumes that all children have engaged parents who are loving and understand their children's use of media. And it's really problematic in homes where parents are abusive, or among homeless kids and other kids who are who don't benefit from caring, engaged parents. It is not going to help them at all. In fact, if you require parental consent of everybody under 18, which I feel is way too old for, doesn't acknowledge maturity levels and what researchers say about adolescent development. If you require parental consent for all of those kids, they're not going to be served if their parents are, want to, are not aligned with them mentally, are abusive, or I think about LGBTQ plus youth who may be trying to figure out their own sense of identity, and their parents want to control that. But that's a very controversial discussion, but I do feel that it's developmentally appropriate for children to work out their identity, push away from their parents, figure out their place in the world, and understand where they're headed without having their parents consent for all of that. Social media is just completely embedded in real life, and vice versa. And you can't really separate what's going on offline in a child's life from what's going on online. It's complicated.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
And in these complicated times, it's important to have some kind of a guide. And the North Star for Utah State Board of Education for this is Utah's Portrait of a Graduate. If you haven't heard of Utah's Portrait of a Graduate, a search engine search will give you all sorts of, it'll give you the actual document as well as all sorts of resources for teachers. And the Portrait of a Graduate was, it was completed, it took 2 years, 2+ years to complete. USBE had input from several stakeholder groups throughout the entire state, rural, suburban, urban, and PTA, government officials, parents, students, teachers. And they came up with 13 attributes that we want our graduates of Utah to have. One of those is academic mastery. And they're all other skills. They used to be called soft skills because people said that they couldn't be measured. Maybe they can. I don't know. That's a different conversation. But things such as digital literacy, wellness, collaboration, communication, critical thinking. Though there are 13 of them, and you can look at them in more detail. But as we're looking at these complicated times, what do we want for students? Do we want them to not do something? Do we want them to do something? Well, there's a lot that we want for our students. And I think that this Portrait of a Graduate is a place to start to try to define what it is that we want to happen with our students.
Thank you. There's so much to follow up on. I definitely will get back to age assurance shortly because I know that's a tangible opportunity for us to discuss. But I would love to follow up with Melanie first about what role technology plays in a student's life, in kids' lives. Like, what does media literacy or digital literacy look like in Utah schools today? how is it being taught? What programs are being used in schools? Because it's really important to have to learn skills, for kids to actually learn these skills instead of writing off a whole sector.
Okay, I'm going to start off with some numbers and facts, and you can dig deeper if you want. We have currently a higher than 1-to-1 ratio of devices for students. We have, for every one student, we have 1.32 devices. And this data is a couple of years old, so it could even be greater than that. The most popular device are Chromebooks, and then iOS tablets, and then Windows laptops. As to how many students have internet at their home, that's at 92% right now. So that's pretty high. I saw an eyebrow raise. Thank you. Because I'm really, really proud that I'm from a state that is that high. I did a quick check of the most recently used computer programs last year. I'll just start reading until you get bored. I'll know you're bored because I will hear yawning. The highest was Canvas, and then Google Docs, and then Clever, which is a single sign-on device that's used at a lot of the lower elementary grades, Google Slides, YouTube, iReady, Google Classroom, Nearpod, Blookit, and I looked down for some of the ones that I didn't want students to use as much. Spotify was pretty way down on the list. Netflix was way down there. So there was just a tiny bit of that. But so that is the what students are doing in the classroom. They are using the technology mostly for learning.
Thank you. No, that's super helpful. And I was going to also ask, because I believe, Anne, you've had kids grow up and go through this Utah school system as well. So curious about your personal experience with that, or if you wanted to follow anything Melanie said.
Oh, yes. Oh, my gosh. That is so cool that our kids in this state are so connected. And I imagine Netflix is not so far down in the home. Right.
It's almost four digits. I was so proud.
Wow. Yeah. I just have to tell you that I was just reading a Substack by a young millennial reporter named Kate Lindsay, who has worked for Atlantic Monthly. And she just was writing on Sunday that the internet has gone back to its pre-social days. Right. So it's so interesting that, I've got a book coming out about teens and social media and mental health, and the Surgeon General has addressed it, and the American Psychological Association, but kids are kind of moving on in a lot of ways. And what she said is that it's mostly now about watching and small group chat. So watching TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, that sort of thing. And instead of like having giant friend lists on Facebook, which is just so baby boomer now, right? They are doing small group chat and DMs. Adam Mosseri, the head of Instagram for Meta, actually confirmed that DMs, direct messaging or one-on-one, and communication and Reels are the two biggest growth areas of Instagram right now. So even then, but Lindsay quoted a young influencer who has 68,000 followers on TikTok saying that Instagram has gotten all judgy and filtered and corporate now. And she doesn't even want to post there anymore. It's like a high school cafeteria with a whole lot of ghost watchers is the term that she coined for it. And she said that the jocks and the queen bees holding on to are just all holding on to what you used to be when you were in high school. And if you were a marginalized person, you kind of want to outgrow that, right? So you're ready to move on. So she said, in Instagram, no one's supporting you anymore. There are no likes, no comments, just lurking. It's just icky, she said. So it's really hard to write laws to help make their social media experience or just their social internet experience more constructive and safe when they've kind of moved on. And they're using some of the same platforms, but they're using them differently. And the more features an app or a platform has, the more options they have for adapting it to their particular use cases. So we know from the research that their internet use and their gameplay and everything they do digitally is highly individual. It's also very contextual. We know that a child's psychosocial makeup and home and school environment are better predictors of online risk or safety than any technology a child uses. It's that individual, and it's also situational. You know, it's sort of like at this moment in the day, am I angry? Am I going to say something mean to a peer? Or am I in a good mood and I'm going to be nice? So it can change throughout the day as well.
If I can quickly add there, just the context point, it is really a moving target here with as rapidly as technology develops. I consistently have to remind myself the smartphone essentially was only introduced in 2007. So we're still early days. And I think looking at the history of technology and technological adoption, particularly in media, it takes a while for culture to adapt. And, you know, here, especially where the tech itself is also rapidly changing. It's just a very volatile environment. But this means we should be researching it and be paying attention to it, and not maybe setting things in stone, because it can change so rapidly.
Thank you. These are excellent perspectives, and I'm learning a lot. While we're talking about how kids and families are using technology, would love to move a little bit towards how we can communicate with parents, how we can educate parents and empower parents and families, not just parents. Taylor earlier mentioned the Utah Governor Cox, the new social media awareness public campaign. And that's something that stood out to us at FOSI, given how much overlap we have with those recommendations. Some of them include for parents and families to learn about social media platforms and how they work, model responsible online behavior for your child, make time to connect with your child device-free, create tech-free zones and find opportunities to connect with your child in person, having honest and open conversations and discussions about the harms, the risks, everything along with being online, and creating a family plan with expectations of how and when to use technology and social media. So all of that echoes FOSI's Good Digital Parenting work, our GDP work. We have free materials online, fosi.org, that allow and facilitate families to have these conversations. An agreement, a device agreement, when you get a kid a device, these are the rules that our family is going to follow. That could absolutely have tech-free zones or times, that type of thing. So we absolutely want parents and families and the kids themselves to be involved in these conversations and to have agency. And we don't want all the messaging to just be negative or fear-based. So a real balance to this about there are really great opportunities that can come from this, whether it's in school or outside of school on social media or others. So would love to hear some thoughts about how we can work with parents and educate parents who are absolutely overwhelmed. I'm definitely not trying to put a burden, all the responsibility on parents. That's not the case, but how to sort of work with parents to better educate and empower them to help make the right decisions for their families.
I mean, I love to jump in here, and apologies if there are tech companies in the room or watching, but like, tech companies have such a huge responsibility here. The products that they supply to make sure that caregivers and parents know that the tools exist. And this is all, when my own experience talking with friends and family, having no idea even that YouTube Kids was an option, or Spotify Kids, or that your wireless router probably has a filter and a timer feature. So I think there really is a responsibility that tech companies, it's been encouraging to see lately Meta, TikTok, investing more in advertising, but it's still, I think, crank the dial on the volume just to make sure that these tools are everyone knows about them and can use them, and it's simple.
The way we talk to parents is we let the districts and charters talk to parents. The districts and charters talk to parents. This isn't something that the state decides.
That makes sense. Well, my kids are now 31 and 26. So I can, and they really grew up. One is solidly a millennial, and the other one is kind of right on the borderline between millennial and Gen Z. And they used technology differently. It was very sort of gaming and sports oriented. They're both boys, men. And so they used social media differently from girls a little bit. But I can tell you that there were no laws and we did okay and they turned out fine and they're good men. And that actually tracks with research out of the University of Wisconsin that came out recently that the headline was really most kids using technology are doing fine. So when we think about, sort of the contrast between, just the headlines are so scary. And then the biases, it's sort of like there's all of this bias confirmation out there. And we don't need to believe it. We need to question those headlines. And, we really have moved past the whole screen time discourse. Scholars in multiple countries have said it's about what's on the screen, not what's on the clock. So how are they using technology is the key thing. And what these researchers in this large representative sample study out of Wisconsin were saying to parents is that the devices in the household need to be owned by the family, not the kids. Have rules about tech use, but focus them on the content, not screen time. As I mentioned before, it's not good either to have no rules or to have really strict rules because kids have workarounds. They have VPNs, they have friends' houses, they have other people's devices, right? And if we have really super strict rules and are draconian about technology, which is really hard on parents as well as kids, actually, then they can easily go underground. And it's their friends who are there on the other side of that screen. And then the researcher said to keep communication lines wide open. And I loved what Lisa D'Amour, a clinical psychologist, said on a podcast recently with Ezra Klein of the New York Times. She said, maybe there's a way that we can figure out how to be a steady presence in our children's lives. That's what they need almost more than anything. That to know that we're watching their back, whether, it's about what they're doing in media or tech, or it's in regular life. And that we need to model the technology use that we expect them to engage in. So these are things that don't have to be overwhelming to parents, I think.
Thank you very much. We just have a couple more questions from me, but we also do have questions available both online audience in the Q&A and in person that we can open up shortly. But to bring it a little bit back to the policy, specifically the age assurance side, there's a couple different things happening at the state level that we can talk broadly about. But I guess first, starting with age assurance specifically, since I know both FOSI and CGO have done some specific work on this, really, Utah, Arkansas, Louisiana, a couple others have come out in sort of do age assurance. You must do age verification with, and as Taylor mentioned about the process from the Utah law, it's still being developed, the regulations. So there's opportunity for clarification there. There was a recent lawsuit and court ruling about the Arkansas one that they brought up some rights in terms of you must verify every user under 18, privacy rights, access to information, getting, I guess, a little bit beyond that. Something that we've seen that work well is in the UK, where the age appropriate design code that was sort of the first of its kind in the world, and the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, which oversees it, has spent years putting together guidance documents explaining regulation, how to comply with how companies can comply with this law, this part of it. And so they've done their own research. And another key thing is that it's an iterative process that the ICO has done, where they weren't coming out of the gates day one looking for an excuse to sue companies. They wanted to work with companies to find out what are the sticking points. What about our regulations doesn't make sense? What can we help clarify? And to this date, it's been in effect for 2 years. And to this date, there hasn't been a major giant lawsuit, but there have been improvements in age verification, age assurance processes from industry. So curious maybe to hear from Taylor and his perspective on this, and sort of really how Utah can succeed in creating effective policy that around age assurance where companies comply and users benefit.
That is a real difficult problem. And maybe I'm the odd person out on this panel, but I'm not sure it can be done in a manner that protects civil liberties and innovation. And even the teens and the kids who we're trying to protect here, I think, and to quickly add to kind of the context, there is a real issue where currently, if you're using the internet in the US, you're treated as a minor under the age of 13 under the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, which FTC governs, which essentially means there's very few resources and tools for kids under the age of 13 because the requirements are so stringent and restrictive, requiring parental consent for data monetization, for instance. So you're either there or you're treated like a 45-year-old adult, just to like an average age. And I think that is an issue, and I think it's worth wrestling with. What is the effective privacy policy, safety, public policy for minors 13 to 18, say? But that is very, very difficult. With age verification, Andrew, you brought up the Arkansas law. The court did enjoin that law for free speech issues. I think privacy, there's two concerns with age verification. In order to figure out in order for firms to comply with these laws, they need to know who the minors are, who is required to have a parental consent before using their platform. And then there's a parental consent verification problem, which is a whole another ball of wax. How do you figure out the parental-child relationship? But the court brought up, free speech issues because age verification, when laws are put in place for age verification, it's essentially the government saying any user cannot use a platform unless they provide identification of some sort, government IDs, biometric information. And you brought up YOTI, and that's still not 100% accurate.
No,
it's facial
it
ID.
has a margin of error.
It has a margin of error. And, what's the difference between a 16-year-old face and a 17-year-old face, a 14-year-old and a mature 14-year-old versus maybe an immature looking 17-year-old, for instance, even though they could have a different maturity levels. And there's, French regulator, Australia have come out and said, even the United Kingdom recently have said, this is just, the technology is not there yet. But regardless of the state of the tech, even if we had a perfect system that could verify ages, there is still the free speech implication where it'd be the government saying you cannot use a platform unless you provide identification. I think that's a big problem for speech in particular. And then, we mentioned the privacy issue earlier, and I think that's really another set of problems to deal with.
And then there's an underlying assumption that if you separate adults from minors, the minors will be safe. Right. And I can tell you, as an advisor to Yubo based in Paris, it's a live video chat app just for teenagers. Adults can join, but they have a huge firewall, and they have age assurance with every single account signing up. So they've doubled down on age assurance. And I can tell you, minors are mean to minors. Cyberbullying happens. Sexting, sexual solicitation, sexual harassment happens among minors. So we can't assume that age verification is like the final solution, the ultimate solution. I think, I'd love to talk about what we could do, but
I will recommend our resource from these UNC researchers. I think it does outline a helpful framework of 3 main categories to look at, dealing with cost benefit analysis first, when proposing age assurance, age verification policies.
And then the privacy thing, just to
Yeah.
build on what you were saying, Taylor. I mean, Europe, all of Europe, the EU is going to have EID, right? And it's building on what was going on during the COVID pandemic, right? So I actually was living in Europe at the time, and you, as a member of any EU country, you had verification of your citizenship and your identity just in an app on your phone. So you could travel quite fluidly and sort of navigate all the different COVID restrictions, right? So I just remember back when I was co-chairing the Online Safety and Technology Working Group in Washington, and the huge discussion that we had about civil liberties around privacy. And, you know, South Korea has a national ID card, right? We don't have that in this country. We just have driver's licenses. We have state ID. If we were to head to national ID, which could be required for things like parental consent, the civil libertarians in our country would just scream bloody murder. And I'm not completely sure I would disagree with them. I'd be a little concerned about a national ID. So I don't know how we're going to work through these problems.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I wasn't trying to put the single sole solution on anyone here, walk us through, but and I think what FOSI said from our age assurance work from the beginning is that age assurance is not a silver bullet. It's not the holy grail, one-stop shop. This is going to be perfect, but that it is and has the potential to be a really important tool to make online spaces safer, to make age appropriate online experiences possible. For getting to the Taylor point, maybe I am the optimist here that I do think that we can definitely make some progress in terms of moving towards a more risk-based and proportional model, where, you know, if it's whatever we collectively decide is the lowest risk online activity or content or service, it needs the lowest level of verification with the least amount of privacy concerns or expression concerns, and then moving up. I'm sure there are instances where being within a year or two in an age estimation technology is more than enough. And then for the worst of the worst, yeah, we might need a hard identifier, whether it be digital, physical, whatever it is. Not saying that's the best option either, but sort of a progression, a proportional model. And then we talked a little bit about privacy. That's a huge problem in the United States. I mean, we've talked about, especially Taylor mentioned some other countries, and Anne as well. They all have privacy laws or comply with international privacy laws. The US does not. And it varies state by state, as Anne said again already. So while California's got one that their online safety bill is based on, other states don't. And that is a real problem because
Utah has one.
There we go.
Consumer privacy protection, yeah.
And it's different than California's. And so, so that has its own challenges. And so, exactly, we need something at the national level. And what we've been saying is that a privacy law would lower the stakes for age assurance, where people would be more likely and comfortable to give some more information, their personal information, if there were use limitations and retention limitations and requirements to delete it that were auditable and that type of thing.
On the willingness thing, if I can chime in quickly. Yeah. So CGO did a poll in January and then again in August, and we're releasing the August results soon, but we asked Americans, you know, are they willing to provide biometric information or government ID to social media companies for the sake of age verification? And overwhelmingly, the answer is no. And this new polling data, more people got off the bench and felt strongly against providing biometric ID. So face, hand, eye, whatever, or government ID. And then we asked about their children's as well, and that's even stronger feelings against. So I think there would be a backlash against this.
And with nuance in all of it, our research, which was now from 2022, so a little bit older, we were surprised at how positive people were about biometrics. They were saying, yeah, we could do that. So all to say, again, it varies, and that's part of the problem here. And we don't want to get into a debate, especially state by state, of what constitutes personal private information, what's a requirement to share information, who is it required to share it with, and what is the definition of harmful to a child. That's a big problem that's going to vary. So got to check in and to see with our audience questions, since we have a lot of people online as well. So I want to give them a chance to see if we have any online questions coming in. And while we're checking that, if there's any in-person questions, I would be more than happy to address to any of the panel or the whole panel. And, oh yeah, please.
If I may, Mr. Barkley, say more about your cost-benefit analysis. I think you mentioned 3 tiers or 3 areas on age assurance.
And for the online audience, the question is about the 3 tiers of age assurance and cost benefit analysis.
Yeah, so this is from our paper by Scott Brennan and Matt Peralt at the UNC Center for Technology Policy. And the 3 categories were balance, specificity, and understanding. With balance, completing cost benefit analyses, adopting a risk-based assurance approach, and offering tax breaks for small companies that use trusted third-party assurance vendors. That's all under their balance recommendation. Specificity, looking at NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, and their guidance on risks for online features, instituting a voluntary certification program for vendors, age assurance vendors, privacy practices, then the understanding, establishing state or federal age assurance sandboxes. I mean, that's one thing that, the perk of our federal system, we're going to see experiments here with Arkansas, with Texas, with Louisiana, with Utah. But we could maybe do that at a more micro level. So that's what they mean by sandboxes. And then finally, assessing the impacts of existing state models and requiring certified vendors to share evaluation data. I ran through that quickly, but that's the framework they offer, and the paper is all available on our website.
Thank you. Any more from the online community? Yeah.
I'm just curious from the panelists, the governor, the governor has come out with this social media awareness public campaign that Andrew had referenced, which offers some advice for parents. And I'm just curious, what is your reaction to kind of this public awareness campaign? And I'm curious, what do you say to parents who are feeling overwhelmed, and what kind of advice would you give parents dealing with all of this?
And the question was about the Governor Cox's social media awareness campaign and how to speak with parents and what advice you'd have for parents.
Well, I think I sort of spoke to that before in talking about, FOSI has, excellent resources for parents, and there are many other resources out there. And I think that the governors are good. Raising public awareness is really good, but I think we could get more concrete. And I think there's a real missing piece in the whole spectrum of online prevention and intervention, online harm prevention and intervention. And that is something that kids and parents have all over Europe and in New Zealand and Australia. And it's called an internet helpline. Utah already has the infrastructure in place. In Europe, they are, some of the helplines are run by decades-old NGOs like Child Focus in Belgium or Save the Children in Denmark. Some of them are new, and so the old ones just wrapped internet research and into all that they knew about adolescent development and mental health. And Utah's infrastructure, we have the Utah Crisis Line, we have safeutah.org. One of them, maybe both of them, are out of the U here. They are based in mental health. And if they just became trusted flaggers, if there was a line of communication between these organizations and the platforms, as is the case throughout Europe and Australia and New Zealand, let me just back up and say that trusted flaggers are now enshrined in Europe's new Digital Services Act. I think it's Article 15. And they are organizations that platforms designate as escalating harmful content rapidly. Some of the trusted flaggers are statutory. They're required by, say, the German government. But I think we should have a law that sets up a network of trusted flaggers, including, say, the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, Safe Utah, the Trevor Project, the Crisis Text Line, and that the law would require that the platforms use them, the list is public, and that they are funded. I don't know whether they're federally or state or however they'd be funded, maybe by the platforms themselves, to help young people and parents when harmful content, and we can get it taken down. I piloted one for schools in the last decade with independent evaluation, and school administrators were so relieved to have someone to call to get cyberbullying and harassing and school fight videos and all of that stuff taken down.
I mean, it is encouraging to see the governor using his platform to spread awareness. And, you know, I brought up the negative framing, Andrew, to my wife, actually. And she's like, well, you kind of need negative images to gather people's attention. If it's just all roses, like it may not gather the eyeballs. That was a decent point. And you know, for parents out there, there is constantly new information, new technology. I mean, I consistently use FOSI's guidance to, you know, if you are a parent, you're a caregiver, you have kids, teens in your life, spend 10 minutes asking them questions about what it is they're doing. What do they do on their apps to engage? And I realize it's not going to fit every situation, but that's maybe like the underlying theme here for this discussion and debate. There's every teen's situation is different, and that needs to be kept in mind. You know, I do want to offer up, you know, Florida had an interesting idea with directing the State Department of Education to incorporate digital literacy and well-being curricula into the public school system, age appropriate. So the law had different like age brackets and kind of requirements for what the curriculum must include. It's not perfect, but I think that's the better bottom-up solution that kind of gets to the, you know, how can we help teens really grow into adults and adapt in a real-time basis to a complex media environment. So I want to plug that. That was passed into law, and American Legislative Exchange Council has a model bill out there that they recently adopted that's based on that law. And I think that's a helpful step forward for state legislatures as they're considering how to deal with this topic.
Thank you. We have time for one or two more questions, especially if there's an audience one or anyone from online. But if not, I'll take one. Oh, we have another online.
On that digital literacy piece, this is more for Melanie. I'm just curious if Utah has any sort of digital literacy baked into their curriculum.
Question was about digital literacy baked into the Utah curriculum.
Yes. Yay. Yes, it is.
Excellent. Yeah.
I think there are actually three literacies that kids need, and one is digital literacy. The other one is media literacy, and the third one is social literacy or social emotional learning. And I don't know if that's required in Utah schools. I do know that Florida has decided not to have any semblance of social emotional learning in its schools. And these media are social. So I think it really helps to develop those skills.
We don't have those specific designations with that vocabulary. They're with a different vocabulary, but they're definitely present.
Thank you. So we'll two more questions. The last one will be a very quick one, but the penultimate question, bringing up generative AI, its use in schools, at home, for kids, for families. I know we've mentioned this briefly when we spoke earlier this week, but you know, what are some of the like maybe top line additional risks, additional benefits and opportunities? How should families, parents, schools, and policymakers keep this in mind?
I mean, you can use it to help. I think maybe to the question about what should parents, caregivers who feel overwhelmed, ask ChatGPT, Bing Chat, Google Bard. What are the resources out there for, you know, keeping teens safe online? But to be mindful, of course, that these tools, they'll offer different answers. They're not 100% accurate all the time. So they hallucinate. But use it as a helpful starting point. And I think, you know, second thing I would add here, a lot of the content moderation discussions, the safety issues we've talked about in the social media context, I think will apply in the generative AI context. And it's encouraging to see, and we'll have to pay attention to it as it gets into the education context. Partnering with kids, maybe even having a teaching role with children. I see that being one of the positive use cases of these AI models going forward.
Right now, the state of Utah has not taken a position as to what districts and charters should do at the local level. And so it is up to the districts and charters to make those decisions.
And I think because generative AI does hallucinate, it puts more emphasis on the need for digital literacy and media literacy than ever.
Excellent. Thank you. And the final question that I love closing panels with is in 30 seconds, so 30 seconds each, what is the one major thing you want people in person and online to take away from this briefing today in any order?
Check out Utah's Portrait of a Graduate. If you have any questions about how to go with your organization or with your product, see how it aligns with the Utah's Portrait of a Graduate.
There are a lot of sad stories in this discussion, but there are even more hopeful and positive stories in how teens and kids use social media. And I think to emphasize the just tremendous entertainment opportunities, educational opportunities, the ability to network and connect with people around the globe, and just how transformational that is for most of human history. When you were a teenager, for most of human history, you were likely stuck in a place for the rest of your life. And here we have this chance where there's too much entertainment, there's too many educational opportunities, too many chances to connect with other people. And we need to provide good tools and develop a culture that can help teens and kids adapt to that world.
For me, it's the importance of agency for young people's well-being. This came out from researchers at Stanford University that's appearing in our book coming out next year. Quote, high agency and positive mindsets, to Taylor's point, are positively associated with well-being. People who viewed themselves as in control of their social media not only reported greater life satisfaction and perceived social support, but also less depression, anxiety, and stress. So we need to factor their agency into our policy making at home, at school, and in government, I feel.
Thank you. What a positive way to close this panel. I love it. And I want to thank everyone. I want to thank especially FOSI staff for helping to put this event together and making it possible to come out here to Utah. Thank you to each of our panelists for their amazing perspective. And I truly so much to think about and continue the conversation. Thank you. And to our in-person and online audiences, thank you for tuning in. We have some exciting opportunities here to continue this conversation and collaborate and work together in Utah over the next year and a half as the regulations come more into effect and any amendments made to the law. As well as every year, FOSI hosts our annual conference in Washington, D.C. This year, it will be November 13th. There'll be an online component, but the best is in person. So we'd love to see you all there. And there will be a state policy panel on that day in the afternoon. So more information will be online and we will continue the conversation. Thank you again and look forward to working with you all soon.